Welcome to the Inside Tech podcast. Today we have a guest, Francesco Valle. He is an expert in the hydrogen, and we are talking about the hydrogen technology and fuel cells regarding e-mobility today, as that has been a little bit overrun in the media probably by the battery technology and large growth in that side of the market. Francesco, you can introduce yourself shortly.
Hello, good morning, Kari. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast. So I'm a consultant in the domain of fuel cells and hydrogen.
There's a lot of discussion when it comes to hydrogen and versus batteries. There's often let's say the debate going on. A lot of different arguments. The one is, of course, what is driving the change from the fossil fuels to the electric and hydrogen powered mobility is that environmental questions. And then there's a lot of discussion always that is actually the hydrogen's environmental impact better or worse than the battery electric cars? What is your take on that?
So I think that first of all is very, very important to define the context and the requirements, because we are talking about two technologies that for some aspects they're very similar, because there are basically two different ways to store energy, because this is what we actually we are talking about. And but at the same time, they have also some very different characteristics that can have huge impact depending on the application. So there was a lot of talking in the last couple of years about efficiency, comparing, for example, the efficiency between fuel cells and batteries. And there are considerations that sometimes are true, but what is important and sometimes is missing is the context, and also by keeping in mind the specific requirements that we have for a specific application. So in general, the common understanding that we have at the moment is that for certain applications, battery technology is the best option. For others, is hydrogen and fuel cells, and there are even some applications where we are in between. For example, in the car industry, for cars, there are certain type of cars, certain type of engines where it's better to use hydrogen, for others batteries. But also it depends a lot on how people will use the car. So at the end, the final user will make a choice depending also his needs. So in the case of the car as a type of product, we are in a domain where we are a bit in interface. Both technologies can have some advantages, but at the same time there are other applications where it's quite understood that which of the two is better.
Yeah, that was like a good point that you mentioned. It's basically both are just ways of storing and transporting basically the energy, either battery or hydrogen. And it was actually Rika wrote recently an article about the hydrogen, and hydrogen also depending on how it is produced. There was a classification. Was it Rika? Gray?
Yes, correct. This color classification. There are this gray hydrogen, blue, and also the green hydrogen, which people also call it the clean hydrogen. Maybe Francesco can expand a little bit more on this. So what are the differences between these three type of hydrogen?
So there are different type of hydrogen, as you say, that depending how they are produced. I heard recently also some people calling also white hydrogen if it's produced directly from solar. In general, what we aim is to use in the future only green hydrogen or eventually this white hydrogen. But what is more discussed is the green hydrogen. So hydrogen that is produced by renewable sources. Then you can have other type of hydrogen that they can be produced using fossil fuels. But this is just to be considered as a temporary solution and only for a period of transition. So all the discussion, I think, should be focused on the use of green hydrogen. If not, otherwise it doesn't make sense the use of a fuel cell system for zero emission applications.
As far as I know, we have very little production of green hydrogen nowadays in today's time compared to gray hydrogen. I think if I'm not mistaken, we have around like 90% of the hydrogen that we produce today is the gray hydrogen, and only very little portion is the green hydrogen. But of course, then we expect them to change in the future.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. At the moment, majority of hydrogen is gray hydrogen, so produced by fossil fuels, because hydrogen is an element that is already used in our society. So there are already several products that they use hydrogen, like production of ammonia, rocket fuel, methanol, but also, I don't know, lubricants, cosmetics, also fertilizers. They use hydrogen in food industry as well. So it's a product that is already present on the market, and until now, it's been produced mainly using fossil fuels. But if we switch to a context of decarbonization, we need to use the key feature of hydrogen, that is its capacity to store energy in a chemical form in a way that is zero emissions. So that is mainly used to have a good fit with the production of energy in a renewable manner. So the system to the hydrogen economy to put in place is a quite complex system that sees on one side the green production of energy, and on the other also the storage of this energy in order to be used when is required. This is a complex system, and the big problem was and it is today, the scale up of this system. So on one side there is the scale up of the green energy production with renewables, and this is already a process that takes some time. But at the same time, as we saw already in the first decades, with the increase of energy production from solar, for example, there was a significant imbalancing of the network, and that is a problem because, as we know, renewable energies, all of them, they are intermittent. So the alternatives, sometimes we have them, sometimes not. So storage is a key factor. So at the same time, we need to make growing the production of energy, green energy on one side, and on the other, the way to handle it. And one key element is also the hydrogen for storing it. So the reason why, to answer to your question, why today we don't have a big production of green hydrogen is that is a process that needs to scale up. So we need on one side production of energy. So this is already happening, and a way to produce hydrogen, for example, with electrolyzers. That is something also that is starting in these last years at a significant level, at least.
Yeah, and yeah, you something like talked about this kind of regarding e-mobility hydrogen use. It depends on the context, like use cases, where it is the best possibility to use the fuel cell technology, where the battery is. And when thinking, like, I remember it's several years ago, I remember some car manufacturers already brought first kind of models which would be hydrogen fuel cell powered models of the cars. But currently, like, the battery vehicles are basically dominating the market. Which one do you think is in the everyday use for the people's their own cars? Which one is more useful, like in your opinion, the hydrogen fuel cell or the battery, or how do you see it?
So first of all, I think it's important to make clear that they are both electric vehicles, because electric vehicles is a vehicle that uses an electric motor for its propulsion, and so both types are also defined as battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles. So we are talking about same type of vehicle, but the difference is how energy is stored within the vehicle. So there are different ways, and as I was saying before, there are also some significant differences between the two that has significant impacts on the functionality and the user experience. So first of all, as when we want to choose a specific energy storage system, what is important is to consider which are the requirements. So depending on the specific requirements, we can switch between one technology or the other. So in the case of transport, Because of course, for different applications, there are different requirements. And even within transport, we have many different sub-applications. But in general, in transport, the key requirements are the cost, then the weight and the volume of the system, the capacity and efficiency that basically in terms of transport is translated in driving range. Then another very important parameter is the charging time, and other more generic that in general are applied in all applications are durability and safety. So those are the main requirements that we need to take into account. Of course, some of them are more important or less important depending on the specific applications. So, for example, one basic rule that we should take into account is that when we need to store a lot of energy, in general, so it's not always true, but in general, it's better to use hydrogen solutions, an hydrogen system with a fuel cell. When we need less energy, it's better to use a battery. The main reason of that is that the battery system is much simpler. So it's focused mainly on one component, that is the battery. In the case of an hydrogen system, it's a bit more complex because we have more components. So we have the hydrogen itself, where actually the energy is stored, but then we have other components like main one, a part of the hydrogen storage is the fuel cell, so the component that is transforming the energy from hydrogen to electricity, and also some other auxiliaries, balance of plant in the system. So since the system is more complicated, there are more elements, it means also that it occupies bigger volume and more space, but that's depending on the size. Because if we have, for example, two electric vehicles, one battery electric vehicle and one fuel cell electric vehicle, if we want to double the range, for example, we need to double the amount of energy that is stored in the two vehicles. So in the case of the battery electric vehicle, we need to double the battery. In the case of a fuel cell electric vehicle, we don't need to double the entire system. We just need to double the tanks, so the amount of hydrogen that is stored. So by thinking in this way, it becomes clear that if we start to increase more and more energy that is stored in the two systems, in the first case we will have a battery that will become very, very big and heavy. In the case of a fuel cell system, then we will have some advantages because the complexity and the size of the system will have a minor role when we have a lot of hydrogen stored and a lot of energy stored. So in general, for example, for a more small car to use in the city, there is no doubt that that is better to use a battery for that. In the case of heavy-duty vehicles, when we need to store a lot of energy, if we would use a battery for that, even in terms of efficiency, we need to consider that we need to transport around a big battery. So that is also a big limitation in terms of payload in case of a truck, for example. So that is very important to consider case by case. And in particular, the size of the vehicle and the amount of energy that we need. So in particular, the autonomy of the vehicle. Then another aspect that is very important is also the recharging time. So for certain applications, it's very important, for example, for the total cost of ownership of trucks, just an example, or other application of buses that they need to refuel in a short time. That can be a very important requirement. If I use my small car to go to the office that is just a few kilometers away, and I can charge my car at the office, in general, it's much better to use a battery electric vehicle. But for example, if we are a large family and we can afford only one car, and we want also to have long trips, maybe in that case, I can also think about an hydrogen car, because I cannot afford two cars, and with the same car, I can do both going to the office and a long trip. Without losing too much time refueling. Yeah. So to sum up, is basically very linked to specific use that we do.
Yeah, your good examples very much explain how. Like I've noticed also when I look the industry and what is happening, and I see that a lot of companies put effort exactly in the heavier commercial vehicles to the fuel cell rather than in the small city cars, private cars. But yeah, open up for me also like why it is so that the potential is seen in the heavier vehicles. And I would say the one thing probably there is like that. I think Rika had some statistics also on this, like when it comes to charging time, also the infrastructure, like electric charging infrastructure in the world is quite much larger than the hydrogen refueling networks at the moment, right? Rika?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
true. I guess this infrastructure is one of the reasons why it's quite difficult for hydrogen car or fuel cell electric vehicles to take off in the mainstream market, at least for now, and at least also in Europe. From the IEA latest data, which is International Energy Association, right now globally we have well over 1 million charging stations. And when we count the charging points, we have about 2.7 million charging points because there are usually 2 or more charging points in one station. And I have this data from TÜV Süd. They did the audit for hydrogen refuel stations in the world, and globally we have 814 stations by the end of 2022. So it's a comparison between well over 1 million charging stations versus 800 something refueling stations for hydrogen.
Yeah, Erika, this is true. Indeed, there is a unproportionate gap between the possibility for a customer to refuel battery electric vehicle or a fuel cell electric vehicle, and this is the reason of that. There are multiple factors. So first of all, the battery electric vehicles are more mature technology, and also the way to recharge it. Then the market in general is more developed, and also because it is easier for a first scale up. For example, I see also where I live in my quarter, I see people that they can start recharging in their homes, even in the city, electric vehicles just by connecting a plug from their homes. So in that case, there is even no need to have a recharging station. In the case to refueling a car with hydrogen is more complicated. So it's not possible to do directly at home unless you have a specific facility, and the recharging points are very limited. And there was always the problem, this chicken and egg problem, to who should start first. So people is not buying fuel cell electric vehicles because there are no recharging station, but at the same time, companies, they don't invest in that because there are not enough vehicles around. So this is something that, of course, will take a bit more time to scale up. And but if we look at in a future configuration, we need to consider also a system that will be quite complex. So it will be not so easy to charge a vehicle in the same way we do today, when there are a few electric vehicles to charge. In the future, when there will be thousands and millions of vehicles to charge. So also the infrastructure of the electrical infrastructure should be updated, and also the organization within villages, within cities, should be completely different than what we have today. So just imagine not just few cars as we see today, but that everyone will have an electric car. And the same, of course, it's valid also for hydrogen. In that case, there will be some advantages because mainly related to the fact that the refueling time will be much shorter. So at the moment, if you compare to what is happening today, sometimes you see queues at the refueling station, and the recharging time of current vehicles is around 5 minutes. So it's very similar to what will be with the fuel cell electric vehicles. In the case of battery electric vehicles, the recharging time is much longer. So this could cause some problems in the future.
Yeah, I have a question actually. That you say hydrogen refueling or charging, how do we call it? Takes about 5 minutes. Current vehicles, how much it's in terms of range? Because I'm driving electric vehicle, I'm always thinking like time, how many kilometers I can get in a certain time when I stop for charging?
So in general, you can consider around 50% more of range with a fuel cell electric vehicle. Then it depends a lot on the type of car and how much hydrogen you store inside. So in a car with one kilo of hydrogen, more or less, you can do 100 kilometers. And the current fuel cell electric vehicles, they can store around 5-6. They can go also up to 6 kilograms of hydrogen. There was a record. Of course, record is not what is happening in daily lives, but with fuel cell Mirai, they managed to run it for 1,000 kilometers. But of course, it was a record, so I think they were driving very, very slowly and very attentive to the consumption.
Yeah, that is already in the range-wise at least very competitive to the traditional ICE cars. Ranges and the refueling times already.
You can still lower in general for normal driving, but of course is higher than the one of batteries, and also you have the advantage that anyway you can start with a full tank in just 5 minutes.
About the charging stations, I started thinking like currently, of course, if we don't look in that, currently electrical infrastructure has been enough to build the charging stations. So investments to build the charging station for electric cars is probably lower investment than building a hydrogen station. Is that assumption correct? I don't have any fact on behind that.
This is correct. This is correct. For depending how you set up a hydrogen refueling station is definitely more expensive. But it's important to consider also what I was saying before, that one thing is to build one refueling station, and another is to have a different system of energy system in the future, where there will be thousands of refueling stations, and also thousands of millions of cars that they will refuel or recharge there. So that is important. This has a direct impact also on the electric network, as I was saying before. So anyway, it needs to be balanced. One advantage of having already hydrogen is that hydrogen is, by its form, since it's molecule, is already a form where you can store energy. In the case of electricity, you need to use it instantaneously. So if you see a bit a broader picture, even in the case of using electricity, you need at certain point to store it somewhere. So one possibility could be to store electricity in the form of hydrogen and then convert it back in electricity and refuel a car. This is also an option. Anyway, in both cases, you will need also to have in certain times some storage capability. So in the case where we will have only zero emission vehicles, probably the management of recharging station, the recharging in general of electric vehicles will not be so simple.
Yeah, that's definitely like even now in the big charging stations, you have theoretically quite high output, but if the station is full, they have to limit the power what cars can charge there if all the charging points are in the use.
Exactly. As you said, is easier to build a recharging station. But one example that I was thinking about that was a few years ago. I was in a conference in Switzerland, and they installed, if I'm not wrong, the first supercharging point, and in a village in Switzerland. And I remember that it was in the news that at the same time 2 cars went to a charge, and there was a blackout in the village. So it was relatively easy to set it up, but when more cars they go to recharge, then you need also to update the entire grid.
And there's something about current hydrogen refueling network. I think I had some statistics that was it half of all the stations are located in Asia at the moment?
Yeah, that's true. More than half in Asia. If you want to be specific, they are mostly in Japan and Korea. So yeah, maybe Francesco can explain why do these 2 countries have special interest in fuel cell electric car.
So even considering the recent investments in hydrogen, still today Japan and South Korea are leading in the manufacturing of fuel cells. So it's estimated around 11 gigawatt of manufacturing capacity today, and more than the half is coming from these 2 countries. So this shows that they are very developed in this type of products, and consequently they developed also the recharging infrastructure. Now also China is starting to catch up, and Europe as well, in particular in Germany. If you see the amount of refueling stations in Germany, it starts to be quite significant compared to other European countries. So there are already plans also in Europe to scale up.
I understood, or I think I read something some time back already, that the European Union is also pushing the countries to build the hydrogen refueling network. Was there something that there would be a goal to have the much better network in the future?
Yes, this is fundamental for starting and scale up also the economy. So people will start buying this type of vehicles and so on. But what will be very important is also for the use in the field of trucking for trucks and buses. So this is something that is considered priority at the moment. So all heavy-duty vehicles are considered, the hydrogen is considered the best technology for the decarbonization of this sector. And for that is important to have a refueling station. So that is the first reason at the moment. Then, of course, when there will be a good network of refueling stations, then more people, I suppose, will be also considering to get a fuel cell electric vehicle.
I read a study by McKinsey. So the study suggests that by 2035, Europe will have more than 800,000 hydrogen-fueled medium and heavy-duty trucks. So with this number of trucks, we will require up to 5,000 hydrogen refueling stations in Europe. Do you think it's a feasible number, especially when we have around, I guess, less than 300 hydrogen stations in Europe, right?
Yes, it's a good observation. There is a big gap between what is the plan and what we are at the moment. So it's very ambitious. I suppose that is something that is feasible, but I don't have very detailed data to say if it is something feasible or not. I suppose if they set this target, that is something that is feasible.
Is that actually is the refueling network and distribution of the hydrogen, or is there something else? What is currently the biggest kind of obstacle for the fuel cell vehicles to start growing fast in the roads?
What about pricing? I know that fuel cell cars and also trucks are more expensive than ICE and also more expensive than a battery electric car. So that's another reason. It's another consideration why people don't choose hydrogen fuel cell compared to battery electric.
Yes, so the cost is one of the requirements that I was mentioning before. Of course, it's a very important requirement, but is one of the requirements. So in certain applications and in certain user cases, is not necessarily the most important. So sometimes if we need to perform a certain task, sometimes it's more expensive. But in general, the main reason why we have higher costs is the cost of the vehicle, but also the cost of hydrogen. So the cost of the vehicle, we already talked before that the battery electric vehicles are more mature technology. There is a different scale of manufacturing, and that is justifying the price of the vehicle. Then regarding the fuel, especially if we consider green hydrogen is produced from electricity. So there is an additional step of conversion, and that is the reason why it's more expensive. This is in general, because a big advantage that we were talking already before is that hydrogen is already a form that can intrinsically store energy because it's a molecule. So there could be also situations where hydrogen can be cheaper, because if the electricity is produced in areas where, for example, there is a lot of sun and the electricity is very cheap, consequently also hydrogen can be cheap and can be relatively easily transported to other locations where maybe electricity is more expensive. So an important aspect of that is the creation of a good system for where to produce hydrogen and a good distribution, and most importantly also the scale up. So those are mainly two factors for the cost. And going back to the other question about the the different factors they drive the adoption of this technology, hydrogen technology. So one important point are the regulatory requirements. So this is something that will make a big difference. So, for example, the ban for petrol and diesel cars in European Union from 2035. This will be important for the change of the market. Another important factor is the funding. We were already mentioning before. Then also the request from people, so demand for greener transportation. This is something also that is having an impact. And of course, as I was saying before, it really it's difficult to have very generic statements because it really depends from application to application.
Yeah, I started thinking about the energy storage point of view. The batteries are quite expensive in a sense, and they use the raw materials which are scarce in a sense. And hydrogen you can produce basically unlimited, right?
Yes, this is true. For the production of hydrogen, for the production and the use of hydrogen, it depends on the type of fuel cells. But for certain fuel cells, for example, PEM fuel cells that are they are leading the transport sector, they utilize some precious materials as well. The advantage, as you mentioned, is that they can produce electricity continuously, but they have a certain lifetime. So at the end of the lifetime, we will need to dispose these devices, and then there are similar considerations that we can have also with batteries. So in both cases, it will be very important to set up a good recycling strategy, and apparently it will be possible in both for batteries and the fuel cells.
In the energy storage wise, like you mentioned, that the hydrogen, the best would be that it can be produced in the areas where there's a lot of solar power, or let's say the wind power usable to keep it green and cheaper. And then it needs actually quite huge capacity to store the energy. In a sense, it sounds like that in that case, for example, the hydrogen is a smarter choice than to use the batteries to store the extra wind energy, for example, in the long term.
Yes, if we see a bit wider scale in terms of large energy generation, then it's important to think together about generation and storage, because what we need to do in the future, if we want to utilize 100% of renewable energy, green energy, we will need to harvest this energy in specific locations and specific times. So we will need to be flexible. We will need to adapt to what is offered by nature, where we have sun, where we have wind, and so on. So to compensate this flexibility, hydrogen could help a lot, because otherwise it will not be possible to use directly the electricity that is produced. And sometimes is a system just based on electric network. In some situations is not flexible enough.
The battery technology has been taking a huge leap forward now that the vehicles are getting more and more common. And what I remember when I studied, I'm also like energy technology engineer myself from the background. I remember the hydrogen, the big challenge in the storaging is the technology was that you have to store it in a high pressure, low temperatures, and it is small molecules, so the material has to be very dense that it doesn't escape. Has there in the storaging in the hydrogen, has there been a development?
Yes. So there has been, if we are talking about storage, there are different applications that they require different type of storage. One of the most critical is the automotive industry, because in automotive industry we have everything fit in a very small volume. The weight is also an important factor, safety, and so it was necessary to develop some storage that will not weigh too much, will not take too much volume, and also at the limited cost. So this is a challenge already today. There has been a lot of development there. And one criticality for that is that hydrogen is a very light molecule, so at atmospheric pressure, it has a very, very big volume. So in order to store significant amount of energy in a limited space, we need to compress it at quite high pressures. We are talking about 700 bars. This is a standard for the high pressure tanks. So that for that we need some specific tanks that are carbon reinforced. And now we have some technologies that we can make it in a safe way, and we can store a significant amount of energy. Of course, it's still a critical aspect, and there are also some alternative technologies for that. Another one you mentioned also about the use of temperature. So if we decrease significantly the temperature, we are able to liquefy hydrogen, but we are talking to extremely low temperatures. So it's also difficult to keep these temperatures, but in that way, we can store energy without hydrogen without creating very high pressures. So this is an alternative that is used. There are some companies that are investing a lot currently in this technology, especially for trucks. So an alternative to have big tanks with high pressurized hydrogen is to have liquefied hydrogen, and that is one solution that could be quite interesting also in the field of aviation for short haul aviation.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting to hear from you about the hydrogen situation, and I think next 5-10 years in terms of the decarbonization of the mobility and so on society, it will be very interesting to follow how the hydrogen will come up also. As it sounds, it's already coming up. It's just waiting the infrastructure and kind of the users to start growing in the right speed.
Yeah.
Is there any other recent development of the fuel cell technology that you can share with us, other than this storage development that we've been talking before?
Yes. So in general, I can maybe say a few words about PEM fuel cells. It is the type of fuel cells where I have most of experience. They are also the most mature and most widely used type of fuel cells, and because of their high power density and low operative temperature, so they are very, very versatile, and this is also why they are used in the transport sector. So there has been a lot of research and development in the last decades to improve the materials. Main objective was to increase performance, reduce cost, and extend the lifetime. So those are the three main objectives of these developments. This is some development that is still ongoing and is still needed. Main components that are critical are in terms of materials are the catalysts, as we were talking already before. Also the polymeric membranes. Now there is a recent proposal for a ban of the materials that are currently used for the membranes in PEM fuel cells. PSFA is called this type of materials, this category. And if this will become law, it will be necessary to adapt the technology and to find alternatives to current materials. So this is something that is still a hot topic today. In the last years, there was more attention on the manufacturing processes, because we are in a stage where more and more companies, they moved to small scale production to large scale production. So there was a lot of attention on how to improve the processes and how to make to produce the different components with high speed and low cost. And today these topics are still a focus of the current development. But at the same time, there is also an increased interest in operational strategies. So basically, how do we use these devices within a complex system? So as we were talking before, we have a system where we need to introduce these devices that has variable inputs, variable outputs. If we talk about the users, that they need energy in certain specific times, and also the input from renewable sources that is not controllable as it was before with fossil fuels. Then we have also different primary energy sources, very different applications, as we said before. And coming back also to battery electric vehicles or battery in general, also there will be the future, the coexistence of different technological solutions. So in this context, it's particularly important to find the best, the optimum way to utilize these devices depending on the specific context. So this is something that is a hot topic at the moment, and there is a lot of starting to increase the research and development on that, on how we could use in the best way. Of course, there are different objectives. One is just operative, so to make it work, but also we can, if we can use these devices in a smart way, we can increase the durability. We can also reduce the cost, because if we use them in a certain way, maybe we can save some money in some materials, and so there are many considerations just related to the operational strategies.
That was very interesting discussion, I think. Francesco, thank you for visiting us. It was very interesting discussion, and at least I learned a lot of new things about hydrogen and the fuel cells.
For me.
Thanks to you. It was indeed an interesting discussion. Thank you.
A special offer for our listeners. We are giving you full access to statistics for 30 days by registering at statson.com with the code STATSON, spelled in uppercase as TATZON. And thanks for listening to our podcast. Visit our website and get our Text 360 newsletters. If you enjoyed this podcast, subscribe, recommend the podcast to your colleagues, friends, and family, and follow us on social media.